Prologue: The century turns dark. The night was silent over Europe in the winter of 1918, as snowflakes drifted across ruined cities and fields still scarred by trenches. World War I had ended, but the world that emerged from its ashes was cracked, bleeding, and uncertain. Millions were dead. Empires had collapsed. Borders had been erased and redrawn like careless strokes on wet paint. The victors celebrated victory, but beneath the celebrations lay fear, fear of revolution, fear of economic collapse, fear of the future. In Germany, humiliation simmered like a dormant volcano. The Treaty of Versailles had cut deep wounds, harsh reparations, loss of land, disarmament. Families went hungry, war veterans begged on the streets, and inflation devoured savings overnight. Many whispered that the war had never truly ended, that the peace was merely a temporary pause before the next storm. In Italy, bitterness grew. Despite being on the winning side, Italians felt cheated. Promised lands were not granted, and unemployment soared. Their anger would soon give birth to a new ideology, a black-shirted movement calling itself fascismo. Across the world, Japan, victorious but unsatisfied, watched Western powers divide the spoils of war. Its leaders hungered for recognition, for an empire, for a destiny larger than the islands they inhabited. Meanwhile, the United States retreated into isolation, choosing distance over entanglement. Europe's problems seemed too far away, too complex. Americans wanted peace, jobs, and a return to normalcy. But normalcy was a mirage. The 1920s glittered like gold: fast cars, radios, jazz music, social rebellion. It was a decade of celebration, invention, progress. Yet beneath the surface, the foundation was weak. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the illusion shattered. Factories closed. Banks failed. Families lost everything. Desperation spread across continents. And in desperate times, desperate people listened to dangerous voices. It was in the shadows of this chaos that a man named Adolf Hitler found his moment. A failed artist, a wounded soldier, a fire-breathing orator, he offered anger, direction, and someone to blame. Jews, communists, foreigners, the weak, anyone but the real cause. People listened. People followed. The world, still staggering from one catastrophe, was slowly, quietly marching toward another, one far more devastating. A storm was gathering. A storm that would consume the entire planet. And when it ended, nothing, no nation, no city, no life, would remain untouched. Chapter 1: Shadows over Europe, 1933 to 1934. 200 words. The year was 1933, and Berlin trembled beneath the sound of marching boots. Germany, battered by economic collapse and political chaos, had chosen a new leader, a chancellor who promised rebirth, pride, and revenge. Adolf Hitler. His rise had not been sudden, it was a slow, deliberate climb built on speeches, propaganda, fear, and the desperate hopes of millions. The German parliament building, the Reichstag, still bore the blackened scars of the fire that had destroyed it. Hitler blamed communists. Many suspected the Nazis themselves set the blaze. But the truth no longer mattered, fear did. Fear gave him power. With the Enabling Act passed under intimidation, Hitler now ruled with near-dictatorial authority. Opposition parties dissolved. Trade unions collapsed. Books were burned. Newspapers repeated only one voice, his. Across Germany, the swastika appeared everywhere, on flags, armbands, buildings, uniforms. Children joined the Hitler Youth. Universities purged Jewish professors. Streets were renamed. History itself was rewritten. But Germany was not the only nation changing. Italy, the first domino. Mussolini had already shown the world how democracy could die in daylight. The blackshirts patrolled Italian cities, crushing dissent. Fascism spread like wildfire, promising glory, empire, and a return to ancient greatness. Hitler admired Mussolini. He studied him. And in 1934, the two dictators would begin a partnership, uneasy, fragile, but fateful. Japan, rising sun, rising ambition. Half a world away, Japanese generals seized control of government policy. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 had proven their power. The League of Nations protested, but Japan shrugged and walked away. Why listen to Western powers who themselves had carved up the world? Japan looked to China next, a vast land of resources, wealth, and strategic power. The world watches, and does nothing. Britain and France, traumatized by the memory of the Great War, clung to peace at any cost. Their leaders believed Hitler could be reasoned with. That his demands were limited. That he simply wanted fairness. They were wrong. By the end of 1934, Hitler had begun rearming Germany in secret. Factories produced tanks disguised as tractors, aircraft masked as mail planes. Young men trained with wooden rifles, preparing for real ones. And the world slept. Because peace, even an illusion of peace, felt far safer than confrontation. But history does not forgive illusions. And soon Europe would learn that the cost of avoiding war is often far greater than the cost of preparing for one. Chapter 2, The World on Edge, 1935 to 1938. 200+ words. The mid-1930s were years of illusion, years in which the world still believed war could be avoided, even as its footsteps grew louder. Diplomats drafted agreements. Leaders gave speeches. Borders shifted quietly. Armies grew noisily. But beneath it all lay a single, undeniable truth. The peace built after World War I was cracking, and no one could repair it. 1. The return of the German army. On a cold March morning in 1935, Adolf Hitler stepped before the Reichstag and announced something the world had long feared. Germany would rearm. Not secretly. Not quietly. Openly. He declared the creation of an air force, the Luftwaffe, led by Hermann Göring, a former fighter ace with a taste for power and luxury. He reinstated conscription, planning to expand the German army far beyond the limit set by Versailles. Europe was shocked. But shock is not action. Britain and France issued protests but nothing more. Some in London even whispered that maybe Germany deserved a stronger army. After all, Versailles had been harsh. Hitler interpreted their hesitation as weakness. He smiled. 2. Italy invades Ethiopia. Elsewhere, Mussolini prepared his own storm. Italy hungered for empire, for land, for a moment of glory that would echo ancient Rome. Ethiopia, independent, proud, and poorly armed, became the target. In 1935, Italian troops crossed the border. Tanks rolled over tribal warriors armed with spears. Poison gas drifted over mountain villages. The world watched in horror. The League of Nations, supposed guardian of world peace, condemned the invasion. But its punishments were toothless. Oil, the lifeblood of war, was not embargoed. Britain and France, fearing Mussolini might ally with Hitler, hesitated. Mussolini saw their fear. And like all dictators, he exploited it. Ethiopia fell. The League of Nations died in spirit. And Hitler took careful notes. 3. The Rhineland Gamble. March 7, 1936. A date engraved in the story of the coming storm. Under the Treaty of Versailles, the Rhineland, a region bordering France, was to remain demilitarized. It was a protective buffer, a guarantee that Germany could never again launch a surprise attack. Hitler tore that guarantee apart. He sent 22,000 German soldiers marching across the Rhine bridges. French forces, far stronger, could have pushed them back easily. German generals were terrified. If France reacted, the whole Nazi regime might collapse. But France did nothing. Britain said the Germans were marching into their own backyard. Hitler later admitted, "If the French had moved even one division forward, we would have had to retreat with our tails between our legs." But no one moved. And so Hitler's confidence grew, dangerously. 4. Spain explodes. In 1936, Spain descended into a civil war that became a rehearsal stage for World War II. On one side, Republicans, workers, Democrats, socialists. On the other, nationalists, monarchists, conservatives, and a rising general named Francisco Franco. Germany and Italy saw opportunity. They sent aircraft, tanks, bombs, a chance to test weapons and tactics. Hitler's Condor Legion bombed the town of Guernica, turning it into a symbol of terror and destruction. Picasso later painted it as a scream of agony on canvas. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union supported the Republicans. Spain became a battlefield of ideologies. Fascism versus communism. Dictatorship versus democracy. After 3 brutal years, Franco emerged victorious. The dictators celebrated. The democracies wept. 5. The Axis begins to form. By late 1936, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed agreements that tied their ambitions together. What began as loose cooperation would soon become the Axis powers, united by expansion, militarism, and hatred of Western democracies. They shared intelligence. They coordinated strategies. They watched the world crumble an opportunity. Chapter 3, The Invasion Begins, 1939. The sun had barely risen on the morning of September 1, 1939, when the world changed forever. It began not with speeches, not with treaties, but with the thunder of artillery and the screech of aircraft diving through the dawn sky. Germany had attacked Poland. And with that, the greatest war in human history had begun. 1. The final hours of peace. In the final days of August 1939, Europe held its breath. Diplomats urged caution. Newspapers speculated wildly. Soldiers across Poland stood watch at frontier posts, staring into the darkness beyond their borders. They knew what was coming. Hitler had already staged provocations, fake attacks, staged assaults, propaganda lies claiming Germans in Poland were persecuted. But these theatrics fooled no one. On August 31st, he gave the final order. Tomorrow, at dawn, invade. 2. The thunder of Blitzkrieg. At 4:45 a.m., German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. Minutes later, Stuka dive bombers screamed down from the clouds, their sirens wailing like mechanical demons. For the first time, the world witnessed a new kind of warfare. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It was a brutal, synchronized assault using aircraft to bomb defenses, tanks to break the lines, motorized infantry to flood through gaps, radios to coordinate movement at lightning speed. Poland fought fiercely, but they faced a storm unlike anything the world had seen. 3. The Polish struggle. Though outnumbered and outgunned, Polish troops fought with courage that stunned German commanders. At Wisna, a small force of 720 Poles held off 40,000 German soldiers and tanks for 3 days, earning the battle the nickname the Polish Thermopylae. In the skies, Polish pilots, flying outdated aircraft, still managed to shoot down dozens of German planes. On the ground, cavalry units attempted daring charges, not against tanks as propaganda later claimed, but against infantry caught off guard. But bravery could not stop the inevitable. 4. Britain and France declare war. On September 1st, news of the invasion shocked London and Paris. Crowds gathered in the streets, listening to radio updates with pale faces and shaking hands. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain waited 2 days, giving Germany time to withdraw. Hitler ignored him. At 11:15 a.m. on September 3, 1939, Chamberlain addressed the nation. This country is at war with Germany. Moments later, France followed. Church bells rang. Air raid sirens tested. Gas masks were distributed. Millions felt the ground shift beneath their feet. The world had plunged into a second global conflict, barely 20 years after the first had ended. 5. The world watches. The reactions across the globe were immediate and varied. Soviet Union. Stalin watched quietly, waiting for his chance. Japan continued its brutal campaign in China, relieved that Europe was distracted. United States shocked, but determined to stay out. President Roosevelt declared neutrality for now. Italy. Mussolini hesitated. He wanted glory, not risk, and Germany's sudden aggression caught him unprepared. The world had been hurled into war, but the map of alliances was still shifting. 6. The Soviet strike. On September 17, 1939, while Poland was bleeding from the west, a second blow came from the east. The Soviet Red Army, under a secret pact with Germany, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, crossed the border. Poland was trapped. Warsaw fell after weeks of ferocious resistance. The last major unit surrendered in early October. The nation was carved in two by its enemies. 7. The first atrocities. With occupation came terror. German side. Jews were forced into ghettos. Intellectuals and leaders were executed. Polish culture was attacked. Villages were burned. Soviet side. Mass deportations to Siberia. Executions of Polish officers. Suppression of religion and speech. The worst of these would be the Katyn massacre in 1940, where over 20,000 Polish officers and elites were murdered by the Soviets. The war was only beginning, and already its brutality was clear. 8. The phony war. After Poland's fall, something strange happened. Britain and France, now officially at war, did almost nothing. From October 1939 to April 1940, there were no major battles on the Western Front. Soldiers dug trenches along the Maginot Line, played cards, drank coffee, and waited. Newspapers called it the phony war, the Twilight War, Sitzkrieg, a sitting war. But Hitler was not sitting. He was planning. 9. Hitler's next move. With Poland conquered, Germany controlled vast farmland, millions of laborers, new industrial zones, strategic positions for further war. Hitler moved troops west. He studied France. He watched Britain. He prepared for something bold, something Europe thought impossible. Because he knew Britain and France feared another catastrophic war. They waited for him to strike. And strike he would. But not where they expected. 10. The world stands on the edge again. By late 1939, the shape of the conflict was becoming clear. Axis powers rising. Germany. Italy, soon. Japan. Allied powers forming. Britain. France. Poland, in exile. Later many more. The United States remained neutral, but Roosevelt knew neutrality might not last. For now, the world hovered in uncertainty. The war had begun, but the worst was yet to come. Poland was the spark. Europe was the fuel. And Hitler was soon to ignite the continents.